Mayur and Aldag, welcome to the Times of Canada Top Political Times. Thank you for coming here and making the time for us.
It's a pleasure to be here today.
Yeah, thank you, and for our viewers as well. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of Times of Canada to the hot political climate that we've all been facing lately in the Lower Mainland. Lots of hot topics, so we'd like to, with your permission, if it's okay, dig right into it.
Absolutely. Let's talk. I'm sure your viewers will want to hear all sorts of political discussion here.
Yes,
so let's get started.
Absolutely. So I'd like to know about your writing and your achievements that you've accomplished since you've been a Member of Parliament.
Sure. So this is my first term as the Member of Parliament for Cloverdale-Langley City. And it's a fascinating riding. I love it. I have all of Langley City. Within the Surrey area, we go Cloverdale, Clayton, Panorama, a bit of Port Kells. And so there's all sorts of different communities. We have a bit of agriculture, a lot of townhouses, a lot of businesses, small businesses. And one of the things I find really interesting about Cloverdale-Langley City is it's the second youngest riding in British Columbia. The first youngest is Suk Dollywalls in Newton, and the third youngest is Randeep Rise in Surrey Centre. So it just shows that we have a lot of young families in Surrey. Yeah. And so I'm out talking to communities.
All interestingly liberal.
Yes, exactly, and we're hoping to keep it that way. Let's say in 2019.
Fingers crossed.
But the fascinating thing is we have a lot of young families here. They're getting their families started. They're buying homes. They're getting their careers established. And so the things that they're really concerned about are a lot of economic kind of concerns. So how do you save up for a mortgage, a down payment on a house? How do you save a bit of money for retirement? And a lot of them have aging parents.
Yes.
And then young families. So how do you put away some money for our children to get them into activities? There's daycare costs, all those economic kind of issues. So that's the number one issue that I hear about. And some of the things that I've been able to work on is related to those financial pressures. One of the first things our government did was brought in the Canada Child Benefit. And it's an amazing program that many, many families in Cloverdale-Langley City benefit from. I have almost over $7.5 million per month in tax-free money is coming in to families in Cloverdale-Langley City. And that's every single month. And we've indexed it twice for families. And it helps. I hear from families all the time about how important it is to help with the raising of their children and just making ends meet. And so that's one of the things that I'm really, really proud of. We also were able to bring in money for transit. And that's the second issue I hear about when I'm out on the doorsteps talking to constituents. They're always saying, I sit too much time in my car. I'm spending hours away from my family, away from my community. And so our government last year committed $1.3 billion to transit improvements, including whatever rapid transit is wanted.
This is the federal government you're talking about?
The federal government contribution, exactly. And then the provinces match that, and the Mayor's Council through TransLink is also putting in money. And so there's a huge investment going into transit improvements south of the Fraser. So right now with the municipal election, we'll be extending the SkyTrain from King George Station down Fraser Highway, and the plan is to eventually
Do you know where exactly it's going to end?
Well, I've had several meetings with TransLink, and they're doing all the planning right now and some of the geotechnical work and designs. It looks like it'll get well into Fleetwood, probably not into my riding of Cloverdale-Langley City in this first phase of the expansion. But I'm working to try to secure federal support for 40% of the cost to get it right into Langley City. And so that's the interest. The TransLink 10-year plan actually shows that it will get to Langley City within that 10-year period. And I know our families would love to see it accelerated and get people moving quickly through our communities as quickly as possible.
Right.
So $1.3 billion to support transit is a huge accomplishment. We also have families, again with young families, just looking for recreational facilities. And so we were able to put almost $2 million toward Cloverdale Athletic Park. That we did turf replacement, night lighting. There's a new clubhouse that's going to go in with Surrey United participating in that project. And it's a large soccer club. It draws from all over the metro region. And anytime I go by there, there's kids out playing, there's adults playing. So having those kind of up-to-date recreational facilities are really important. Right. So that's something else I'm really pleased about.
So the biggest challenges in your writing are lack of transportation, I hear from you. What is your plan along with, what is your plan to work with the current provincial government, the NDP, to resolve those issues?
Yes, well, and the NDP has actually been quite a good partner to work with on transit issues and transportation issues. And so the provincial government has matched the $1.3 billion for south of the Fraser transit improvements. And they are part of the 10-year plan. And so we'll continue working with the province to see how quickly we continue the expansion. We're looking at B lines being added. There's additional buses and bus services being added. So it takes all levels of government coming together so that we can actually keep people, as I say, moving fast and efficiently through our community.
I see. Talking about transportation, the Highway 99 stretch, the Liberals wanted to have the 10-lane bridge going up there. They spent $80 to $100 million that's sitting on the side of the road there. The dirt is sitting there. What is the plan if, in case your party does come into power in 2019 again, provincially or federally? What's the plan, or where do you stand in terms of having the bridge versus the tunnel debate?
Right. It's one of the really interesting issues, and I'll say it's sometimes a bit frustrating, but the agreement that we have with the province for infrastructure is that the federal government allows the province to make these kind of decisions. We actually feel that the kind of debate, bridge versus tunnel, is probably best decided by the people who live here and not in Ottawa. And so our commitment is to help with transit and transportation improvements, but we're not going to dictate what's the best means. We'll wait for the province, the local mayors to come up with their solution and then approach the federal government for funding. And if it fits within our priorities and transit and transportation improvements do, then federal money can be allocated to these.
But do you support the bridge, or do you support a new tunnel, or do you support the NDP in their endeavor of doing nothing?
Well, I would say that we need to get people moving through that corridor more efficiently. I think all of us have. I know I've missed planes and I've missed ferries. I've missed meetings because you're sitting in the gridlock traffic and rush hour. One accident is a disaster, and I think all of us have had that experience. Anybody who moves outside of downtown Vancouver has had to go through that corridor at some point. And so I actually don't have a preference. I think whatever is done, I think needs to be seismically safe, and it needs to accommodate transit, because I would like to see some sort of rapid transit or B line service, dedicated lines, HOV lanes, through whatever is done, whether it goes under or over the river. I don't care.
It doesn't matter.
Let's get something moving and get our communities moving.
Well, I was interviewing Ginny Sims not long ago, and her argument was by relieving the gridlock, essentially the parking lot rather than being on this side of the river, is going to be on the other side. Do you agree with that statement?
Well, I've heard that argument. I'm not a traffic specialist, and so I think that it makes sense that there are other bottlenecks as you move into the Vancouver area, and so I think that we have to look at how we move people throughout the whole metro region. That's where I'm saying rapid transit needs to continue being expanded, and we need to get people out of cars. We're spending way too much time idling, as you say, in these parking lots where we should be moving, and that's where if we can get SkyTrain, light rail, B lines, and less vehicles, it's good for the economy, it's good for the environment, and it's good for our communities and our families.
Of course. So one of the hot topics in the Lower Mainland has always been housing.
Right.
Affordable housing, not affordable housing, rents are too high, property prices have gone skyrocketing, but recently they've corrected themselves. Where do you sit? Where is your mindset for supporting the housing stress test that the federal Liberal government brought in? Justin Trudeau's government brought in the stress test, which has really caused a lot of stress, by the way. What is your plan as a Liberal party? What is your plan for relieving the stress test? Is there any talk about it? Is there anything you can pitch in?
Right. Well, if I can go back just a step. So what we saw, as you said, we had these housing crises, and I think that many people who are trying to get into the market saw themselves actually losing that ability to own a home. And so when I was out talking to constituents on the doorsteps, a lot of people are saying, I can't afford to live in this community. I'm going to have to continue moving further and further up valley. My commutes are going to get longer. We need to do something.
Right.
A lot of foreign investment. We've seen recently the provincial report on organized crime and money laundering and how that's affected distorted real estate housing prices. And so the federal government worked with the provincial government on a number of suites. One of them, as you say, was the stress test. And part of the issue there was the continued climb in housing costs. Now, we want people to have equity in their homes, but we don't want it to be distorted so that people can't get into the housing market. So it's trying to find that kind of sweet spot between equity in homes and a viable market for new homeowners. And so, but we also have the really high levels of consumer debt and household debt in Canada. And so from the federal government, the concern was that if people kept borrowing and borrowing and borrowing, and if we do see interest rate increases, that it could be disastrous for the Canadian economy.
Of course.
And so we needed to try to slow down this climb in real estate, particularly in the Vancouver and Toronto markets. So the stress test was brought in, and as you say, it's actually cooled things. We're not seeing the kind of growth. I was reading a report just yesterday that says that there's been some decline in some housing markets in the metro region.
Well, as a realtor, I can, sorry to interrupt you, but as a realtor, I can tell you it's more than a small decline.
Well, I mean,
it's a massive crash.
There's for sure been on detached single-family units. In Vancouver, I saw some places have come down in the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yes.
And but there's actually some areas where townhouses are continuing to increase in value. We have condos that have seen some slippage, but not to that same extent. And so I think there's been a bit of an adjustment, and we need to be very careful because I'm also hearing from the construction starts have slowed down. We know that we don't have this housing supply, and so we need to continue building. So it's a bit of an adjustment that's happening right now. Specifically, your question on the stress test, my point and perspective is that we needed it to do a certain thing, which was to stop that uncontrolled growth in prices, and it's achieved that. And so now myself and my colleagues within Surrey and the greater metro area are having discussions with the finance minister, the prime minister, to see if it's time to revisit the stress test and to see what that might look like, what the consequences could be.
Are we expecting an announcement soon?
I would say that it's still a discussion that's underway. So I'm not expecting a discussion or an announcement of any sort. I wouldn't say that it's imminent, but I'd say that we are having many discussions in Ottawa about what is the next step for the stress test. And I believe that it has served its purpose in the Vancouver market, and that there may be some readjustments that could be done there to allow people to...
First-time buyers, fixed mortgages.
Exactly. And so it's like, what's that kind of mix of financial tools and incentives that will prevent us from getting into the uncontrolled growth again in housing prices, but allow young families like the ones in my constituency to actually get their feet into the market. So that's where we're at right now on the stress test.
The Conservative Party has actually indicated that if they're in power, I happened to talk to Andrew Scheer myself, and he had mentioned that they're definitely going to be not only revisiting it, they're going to be not abolishing it, but definitely reducing it to a point where people can buy again, and there's not, the slowdown that is causing so many job losses in the Lower Mainland. Our economy thrives on construction, and with the stress test, that has caused a lot of slowdown in employment as well. So.
Yes, and I don't think anybody will deny that. I think that what everybody should be looking for in the upcoming election are what are the things that are actually going to help our residents and help the economy, and not be just things that are being said for political expediency and gain that actually aren't going to be delivered on. And sometimes in elections, people make promises that they can't deliver on. And so I think that look at what each of the parties are coming out with to look at the issues of housing affordability and sustainability in the metro region. And but I think this will be a really key issue in the upcoming election. Absolutely.
Yep. The federal election you mentioned, so any thoughts or any predictions from your end? Which government are we going to see nationally? Well,
I'm definitely hopeful that we're going to continue to see a Liberal majority government under Prime Minister Trudeau. I think that I've had many discussions with constituents and out on the doorsteps about what are the indicators of success. So how are we doing as a society? And right now the economy is doing fantastic in Canada. We're seeing growth unparalleled. In the
G7.
In the G7, we're doing well, and even though there's some bumps along the way that we've seen because of some of the policies coming out of the States, and with some of the tariffs and other policies, we've still been able to negotiate other trade agreements. So the economy is quite strong, and there's some room for it to even slow down a bit, but to still continue with jobs and feeding the Canadian economy. Unemployment is in single digits. We haven't seen these kind of low unemployment rates since the 1970s. And families are doing well. There's still a lot of household debts. We need to help with those kind of issues, and that's where programs like the Canada Child Benefit are helping. But I think that we just need to look at what the economy is doing, how Canadians are doing.
But do you think the SNC-Lavalin case has affected your party in a negative way?
I think that a couple of months ago, I heard a lot about it. There were questions about what it actually means, and interestingly enough, there are a lot of people in British Columbia that asked about why is this a Quebec issue, but they don't recognize that SNC-Lavalin actually employs people in the lower mainland. In Surrey, I think I'd heard that there are somewhere 7 to 9 projects that SNC-Lavalin is currently involved with. So these are people in our communities who are having these good paying jobs in construction and in engineering and design and big public projects. And so I think that people were really curious and somewhat concerned about what was happening, but not understanding truly the issue. I think that what I'm hearing from many people now is they've seen that the Prime Minister was doing what I believe was the Prime Minister's job, to make sure that all tools were being looked at to make sure that this important company in Canada continued, but that those who had made some
But is it
pretty
fair
bad
for him to
decisions-
interfere with the judicial process?
I don't think he did, and I think that many Canadians
Audio
remember that.
audio reports suggested differently.
Well, I think that what the audio report said is that he was doing his due diligence. He was saying to the then Solicitor General, have we covered all bases? I think that if he had not done anything and the company had folded, there would have been a lot of questions about why he didn't ask any questions and why he was completely hands off. So I think as the leader of the country, he has a responsibility to say, are we good here? Are all aspects of this file being considered and covered? At no point, and the former Solicitor General herself said that there was never political interference. And so to me, I think that the Prime Minister did what he had to do while respecting the independence of the legal system. Okay. So back to your question about if there's damage, I think it's just raised some questions about how government works. The role of the Justice Minister combined with Solicitor General. So there's a bit of an investigation now happening to see if perhaps those roles should be separated and what the implications would be. Right. But I think that the Prime Minister has demonstrated himself over the past 4 years that he has a huge heart for this country and for Canadians, and he will continue to do anything and everything that he can to make sure that we all succeed moving forward.
Okay, thank you. The other question I have for you is when the Liberals were in power, there was talk about Uber and Lyft, ride-sharing companies, to come into our province, and when the Liberals went away, now the NDP's here. There was talk that we're going to bring them in, so on and so forth. What is your party's position on Uber and Lyft to come into and help the people out? Like, right. Getting a taxi is almost a Herculean task here.
Right. I think that again, this is one of those issues that I'm not convinced that the federal government has jurisdiction or responsibility for it. And so I think that we need to look at the responsible levels of government to make sure that it's operating within their respecting their decision-making abilities. I think that we are definitely in a sharing economy, and so things like ride sharing. I think I hear from Canadians asking for it. In Ottawa, in Ontario, they have it, but I also talk to the taxi industry. And there's a lot of investment. There are people who have built their lives on the taxi licenses, which are expensive. And so I think that as we move and adjust how our economy works, we need to do it carefully. And it is a provincial jurisdiction, and so I think that the province will likely be looking at how do they move into this kind of new economy that is upon us.
Vancouver is the largest city in North America not to have Uber or Lyft.
Right. And we're an expensive city, and we have a lot of cab drivers, like I say, with huge investments who have built their families and homes around this business. And so it's a transition, and I think that really that transition is upon us. And so it's like, how do we do it in a way that isn't going to, again, cause people job loss and economic catastrophe? I actually have not used Uber in Ottawa. I use taxis because I know of the investments that are there. But I think that as we make some adjustments to how that industry works and operates, that it will make it less impactful as ride sharing and other types of sharing economy things become more commonplace. And I think ultimately will be allowed in BC.
Right. Thank you. Also, money laundering seems to be a very hotbed topic these days in real estate and casinos. so on and so forth. Of course, it's made an impact on our economy in our province. Where does the Liberal Party and you personally, what is your opinion on that?
Well, I think that it is this issue. It has had really negative impacts. I think when you have dirty money, when you have illegal money entering the economy, we've seen the report from the provincial government recently say that housing prices has probably negatively increased by over 5%. And when you have affordability issues, that's wrong. When people are doing things to access money illegally, that creates an unlevel playing field. And so I think that as the federal government, we have things that we can do to prevent dirty money from coming into the Canada. We have a role looking at money from organized crime and other illegal proceeds from entering the market. But we need to work with the province in order to do that. And I think that in light of what has come out recently in British Columbia, the Prime Minister and our government has said that this is not just a BC issue, it's a national issue. And we need to look at how we can work together with all levels of government to deal with or proceeds of crime and other money coming into Canada that have negative consequences.
Okay, well, thanks for that as well. And just as a parting thought, a message to our viewers of the Times of Canada?
Well, I would really like to encourage people to get involved in the elections as we run up to October 21st this year. The federal government has makes many important decisions that do affect our lives. Right here in Surrey and in the riding that I represent, Cloverdale-Langley City. I think it's really important to understand the candidates like myself. I will be running again for the Liberal Party, proudly running under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And I think understanding the issues, looking at the solutions that parties are putting forward to solve these issues, and then ultimately on election day to get out there and vote. That's the message that I would put out to your viewers.
Thank you very much, and thanks for coming.
Thanks, always a pleasure.
Thank you.